In a Seneca village there lived a boy. His parents died when he was very young, and a woman who lived nearby adopted him. She gave him the name Puishan, which means the orphan. As soon as he was old enough, she taught him hunting. She brought him a bow and arrows and instructed him to go to the woods and hunt birds. In time, the boy became a skilled hunter and provided meat for his mother and even her neighbors. Each day he went deeper into the woods than the day before. One day, while wandering, he came upon a clearing with a round stone at its center. He chose to sit on the stone and started to attach feathers to his arrows. Suddenly, a voice questioned him, "Would you like to hear some stories?" Puishan looked about. Seeing no one, he returned to his arrows. Once again, the voice asked him, "Would you like to hear some stories?" This time, Puishan wanted to know where the voice was coming from. After it asked, "Shall I tell you stories?" For the third time, he realized it was coming from the stone. Puishan asked, "What is that? What does it mean to tell stories?" The stone replied, "It tells what happened a long time ago. If you give me birds, I'll tell you stories." Puishan agreed, saying, "You may have the birds." After that, the stone would tell many stories every day, and the boy would listen until darkness fell. Then the boy would go home and return again the next day. As the number of birds Puishan brought home dwindled, his mother became concerned and sent another boy to check on him. The boy followed Puishan and hunted birds along the way. When he arrived at the rock and heard the stories, the new boy joined Puishan and chose to share his birds for the stories, just like Puishan did. The following day, the boy informed Puishan's mother that Puishan had not brought home many birds because there were few remaining in the forest. He also stated that he wanted to accompany Puishan for hunting as he found it enjoyable. The mother, still concerned, sent 2 men to follow the boys. They trailed them throughout the day until they reached the clearing with the stone. Upon hearing the voice of the stone, the men approached the boys and they all listened to stories together. As night came, the stone instructed them to invite the entire village to hear the stories the next day. The magic stone instructed the group to each bring food and clear the area around the stone so they could sit in a circle. The following day, once these tasks had been completed, everyone fell silent and the stone thus began. Now I will tell you stories of what happened long ago. There was a world before this. The things I'm going to tell you about happened in that world. Some of you will remember every word that I say, some will remember a part of the words, and some will forget them all. I think this will be the way, but each man must do the best he can. Hereafter, you must tell these stories to one another. Now, listen. This is a summary of the story of Puishan and the stone that had the power to tell stories. It is known as the origin of stories, and it depicts how storytelling came into existence according to the Seneca people's beliefs. In this series, we will explore the origin and development of short fiction, tracing it back from ancient creation myths, animal fables and legends, to the medieval fairy tales and novellas, to the modern and contemporary short story and its subgenres. Stories are an integral component of human existence and possibly define our species. Like the Seneca people who traded their birds for stories, all cultures and peoples all over the world have their stories. The oldest documented form of stories is visual, as is evidenced by the cave art found worldwide, such as in France's Lascaux caves and in Spain's Altamira. Several of these pieces date from up to 40,000 years ago, but narrative is much older than this. When Picasso saw the paintings in a cave at Lascaux in the 1940s, he supposedly said, "Since Lascaux we have invented nothing." Unlike cave paintings, early stories were conveyed orally, and only some have endured to this day after the invention of writing. The earliest of these stories preserved in writing are already highly sophisticated. In Mesopotamia, we have the Sumerian tale of the old man Utnapishtim who survives a great deluge and becomes immortal. In his journey seeking immortality after the death of his friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh visits the old man for the secret to immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh was preserved on clay tablets in the 2nd millennium BCE. In Egypt, there are a few tales that were preserved on papyrus, such as the shipwrecked sailor and the exile story of the Sinohe, a nobleman who flees Egypt into exile after he hears about the assassination of the pharaoh and who finds a new home in the land of Retinu or the Levant. It is his sense of homesickness and nostalgia and old age that makes the story relevant and powerful. In Greece, animal fables and tales of gods' adventures were transmitted orally till the 4th century BCE, when they were collected, and we have some of these in the book known as Aesop's Fables. In India, fables were an ancient mode of storytelling and at the same time a means for imparting theological instructions that would later lead to the creation of some very influential collections of stories. Today, we still love stories, and just like the Seneca people, we pay to hear and watch them. The power and the importance of stories and storytelling is depicted time and again in some great tales. In the Arabian Nights, Shahrazad saves her life and the lives of many other women from the king's brutality by telling gripping stories night after night. The opening frame tale relates that one day when King Shahryar finds out that his wife has been having an affair with his servant during his hunting trips, he kills his wife and decides to have a woman each night and to kill her the next day. This goes on until one day Shahrazad volunteers for the task. But Shahrazad, who understands human nature well, has her own plans. Every day she tells the king a story. Eventually these tales transform him into a different individual. The result is that the king puts off executing her and other women to hear a new tale the next day. Moreover, we engage with stories for both amusement and enchantment. In Boccaccio's Decameron, written in the 14th century, 10 people group together and flee to the countryside away from the plague and opt to tell one story each over the course of 10 days. Nothing is more companionable than a good story to pass the time. Stories such as those in the Decameron and the Arabian Nights can take the listener to other worlds, to distant lands. They free us from the confines of time and space. Stories are even more complicated than that. They impart knowledge and wisdom. In the renowned Eastern collections of stories such as the Panchatantra and Kalila wa Dimna and the long-standing tradition they have inspired worldwide, animals are personified in human-like behavior, and speech convey brave and radical ideas that may not be voiced otherwise. These stories, referred to as fables, impart valuable messages. Through the voices of animals, they teach rulers and readers about authority, friendship, love, betrayal, and many more topics. Today, our political leaders could particularly benefit from the wisdom imparted in these stories. Wisdom is needed more than ever to deal with urgent issues such as climate change and the danger of a nuclear war. Stories can potentially offer even more. They can make us better humans. We empathize with the fictional people we encounter in stories, and that teaches us and gives us the skills to understand ourselves and the people around us better. In these stories, we encounter individuals from different backgrounds and lifestyles. Engaging with these fictional characters cultivates our empathy and ultimately allows us to better understand others and relate to them. We become superior listeners. We learn how to listen to people who differ from us. As a result, we become more empathetic and open-minded when encountering those who do not share our worldview. But more than this, stories can shock. Nothing like stories can make us see the world anew. They present the world in an unusual way, causing us to perceive our surroundings in a new light and gain new insights into the life and the world we inhabit. Stories can challenge our biases, misconceptions, and prejudices, making us realize that there are many equally important perspectives through which we can view and interpret the world. It is no surprise that philosophers and and prophets throughout history have used stories and metaphors to challenge traditional views. From Socrates to Aristotle to more recent philosophers and writers such as Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, parables have been used to present their views and challenge the worldview of their listeners or readers. The importance of stories comes from the fact that they are not just found in books or films. Stories are also a part of our daily lives. Short narratives or stories are the most natural form of communication in our everyday life. Narrative mode is a part of how we perceive and recreate the world. We use stories to think and communicate. In the past, before mass media and the printing press, humans shared their experiences, challenges, and interactions with members of the community or other tribes through stories. They used the simple story to transfer knowledge, history, and beliefs from generation to generation. We often forget that we mostly communicate through short narratives and anecdotes to make sense of the world and express ourselves each day. We use a narrative form of language to chat with our friends and colleagues about the weekend, about birthday parties or holidays, or just share some juicy gossip. We enjoy the company of friends who can communicate eloquently and can relate their experiences in a good narrative style. Stories help us to think carefully about how we communicate with others, whether formally or informally. They can teach us how to have better conversations by turning things that have happened to us or that we heard from others into clear and effective stories and anecdotes. This makes conversations, presentations, or casual chats more interesting and enjoyable to listen to. Even in today's tech-savvy world, stories are still an integral part of our daily lives and even our work. The best way to impart information is by weaving it into a narrative form. Even science, which is filled with complex equations, transforms its data into a narrative to make it comprehensible to those outside the scientific community. Early forms of tales such as myths of creation and legends were humankind's earliest efforts to address some of the fundamental questions that humans have sought to answer throughout the ages. It is intrinsic to human nature to seek the reassurance and ease that comes with understanding the world and rendering it sensible. These myths attempted to answer questions regarding the beginning of the universe, life, and humankind. As such, stories served as a medium to make sense of their world. They worked like a compass to help them find their way. One characteristic of these myths is their sacred nature, as the storytellers believed them to be true. If myths depict gods and worlds that predate humans, such as we saw in the case of the storytelling stone, legends then are concerned with the halfway world between humans and gods. They are about how life was in the dawn of the world's creation. Focusing on figures such as saints and heroes, legends typically feature characters who are both half human and half god, exploring their adventures and accomplishments. Other traditional forms of storytelling include fables and parables. Parables contain clear teachings on morality and beliefs for readers or listeners, while fables are often more enigmatic in nature. This ambiguity has contributed to the fable's endurance as a genre for millennia and continues to inspire modern fiction and popular culture such as cartoons. The forms and modes of storytelling mentioned thus far have been oral. In oral cultures, short narratives were often a communal activity, retold time and again. No story was ever told in precisely the same way twice, as each storyteller contributed their own style. Another distinguishing feature of such narratives, set apart from later forms, is the didactic quality, passing on a worldview from one generation to the next. Then, during the 14th century, Boccaccio and Geoffrey Chaucer revolutionized short fiction in both content and form by creating a new genre of stories known as novellas. These writers reimagined the framed story collection style from earlier works like the Indian Panchatantra and Kalila Wadimna and elevated them to an entirely new level. Their tales were more sophisticated and they widened the scope of storytelling, now encompassing secular themes. Instead of addressing abstract concepts of morality, these stories referenced everyday social conditions and provided entertainment. The content focused on ordinary issues and took place in familiar settings. The language used in these stories was drawn from the vernacular, and the stories were bound together as a collection by a frame story. This tradition gave rise to a body of literature that spanned several centuries. Folk tales represent a crucial form of storytelling. The Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights as it is often called, is a Middle Eastern collection compiled between the 8th and the 14th centuries. At the same time in Europe, fairy tales were shared in an oral storytelling tradition dating back millennia. Later on, during the 16th century and particularly in the Romantic period, interest grew in the literary qualities of such tales. Straparola and Basile in Italy, Charles Perrault in France, and the Grimm brothers in Germany were some of the renowned collectors of fairy tales. These collections contain some of the most famous fairy tales today, including Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, and many more. In the era spanning the 14th to the 19th centuries in the West, short fiction underwent a stagnation phase for several reasons. One contributing factor was the self-imposed restriction of authors to the imitation of the novellas of Boccaccio and Chaucer. Another factor was the invention of the printing press, which led to the emergence of the novel, which in turn eclipsed the short story. Yet another reason was that during these centuries, travel became more widespread. This, together with the printing press, gave rise to other forms such as the sketch and the journalistic essay, which attracted the attention of people who were more interested in tales of foreign lands and a realistic style of writing. However, in the 19th century, when magazines began to circulate, the short story regained its importance and began to flourish. Writers reinvented short fiction once again. A new genre of stories and short pieces such as tales and sketches flourished in Russia, France, Germany, and the United States. Prominent writers included Gogol and Ivan Turgenev from Russia, Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, and Henry James from the United States, and Maupassant and Flaubert from France. Gogol was very influential, and his influence is not limited to Russian literature, but extends to the world beyond. Either Turgenev or Dostoevsky supposedly said, "We all came out from under Gogol's overcoat." In his stories, Gogol focused on life in the Ukraine and Russia, highlighting the dehumanizing effects of bureaucracy. In a lecture on Kafka's The Metamorphoses, Nabokov highlights the similarities between Gogol and Kafka's characters, saying, "In Gogol and Kafka, the absurd central character belongs to the absurd world around him, but pathetically and tragically attempts to struggle out of it into the world of humans and dies in despair." In The Overcoat, a story by Gogol, this tendency is clearly expressed. The hero of the story, Akaki Akakeyevich, resembles a group of fictional figures of the scribes, such as in Melville's, Bartleby, and Flaubert's similar characters. These figures in vain try to liberate themselves from their circumstances and enjoy an ordinary life only to fail while attempting. Turgenev, on his part, focused on the lives of common people, especially the serfs. He depicts the suffering and struggle through sketches that together paint a picture of the Russian countryside. Edgar Allan Poe, one of the first writers to theorize the short story genre, utilized the form to evoke the foreboding atmosphere preceding the Civil War. The stories of Maupassant are intensely realistic. His characters live in a world of sensual appetites and material aspirations, where greed and ambition serve as the motivating factors, and any higher emotions are either non-existent or doomed. Many of the stories' tragic force comes from Maupassant's presentation of his characters, whether poor people or bourgeois, as the victims of their fate, a fate they dared to resist but yet fighting hopelessly against. As the century drew to a close, the short story genre underwent another transformation. A plethora of short story writers experimented with the form. This was largely influenced by the changing economic and social climate. The earlier part of the century saw the rise of the ideas of Charles Darwin and Karl Marx, who challenged age-old conventions. This marked the beginning of the modernist era in literature and culture. The beginning of the 20th century was characterized by even more groundbreaking changes. With scientific advancements like the theory of relativity, our previously held understandings of space and time were challenged. However, the First World War had the most significant impact. In one of Ernest Hemingway's stories, a soldier named Kreb returns from the war and struggles to resume his previous life. For instance, his mother tries to aid him in prayer, but he is unable to participate, leaving her to pray on his behalf. Similarly, Kreb is unable to relate to women. In A Farewell to Arms, Hemingway writes, abstract words such as glory, honor, courage, or hallow were obscene beside the concrete names of villages, the numbers of roads, the names of rivers, the numbers of regiments, and the dates. A novel literary style was required to articulate this new condition then. To this end, the conventional plot was abandoned. With a plot-free tale, emphasis was redirected towards emotionally charged moments. Paradoxically, this development brings the short story back to its roots in myth, as it reveals sacred moments and the unconscious. These instances are termed epiphanies, and these are moments of realization. An important invention of the time, the cinema also influenced the language and writing style of short fiction. The depiction of physical reality became more cinematic, as demonstrated in the works of Ernest Hemingway. Further into the century, new subgenres of short fiction emerged, including the short story cycle. This literary form is composed of separate yet interconnected stories united by a shared setting or central character. The cycle offers a range of perspectives from which stories are told that eventually form a single collection of stories. This new genre, according to Sherwood Anderson, who is one of the pioneers of the American short story cycle and who wrote Winesburg, Ohio, better depicts the reality of a place, a city, or a group of people. Anderson argued the United States was too diverse to be expressed through novels. Instead, he employed the diverse and concise narratives of the short story cycle to portray this diversity. Similarly, writers like James Joyce used this form to depict his hometown of Dublin. The short story cycle form, through its disconnected short narratives, creates a microcosm that is at once diverse and disconnected. Towards the end of the 20th century, writers exploring themes of postcolonialism, diasporic ethnic minorities, and gender identities found a voice in the multi-layered cycle form. Chinua Achebe used it to express postcolonial themes, while Alice Munro addressed gender issues and diaspora communities. Although flash fiction, or short stories as it is also called, is one of the oldest forms of short fiction, dating back to fables and parables, was not recognized as a mode of short fiction on its own until recently. Flash fiction gained full recognition only towards the end of the 20th century, when the internet and the new platforms for writing gave the practitioners of the form more importance. It is intriguing how storytelling evolves over time and how writers employ various modes of storytelling. Each genre of storytelling is a way of communication that emerges in a specific historical context. Each new mode is developed in order to either depict changes to the human condition and man's struggle during these changes, or to inspire change. Many writers merge more than one of these modes to create particularly rich texts, such as those found in the stories of Kafka, Sherwood Anderson, William Faulkner, and Ernest Hemingway. Each form or genre is a message in itself because it gives voice to certain ideas and expresses them in a certain way. Reading these various modes serves as a reminder of the potency of style and human imagination in promoting creativity. It is important to observe that this series explores the potential benefits of stories and storytelling. Stories have the potential to be misused and employed to propagate biases and misrepresent individuals or groups. The misuse of narrative, which has become commonplace in contemporary society, where uncovering truth is a daunting task, will be analyzed in a dedicated episode.